Okay, guys, good morning. It's 8:27, Thursday, March 4th, and we got about 3 minutes till class time, so welcome back, and just get situated, and we'll be good to go in just a few minutes. Hi, Roheen, how's it going? Hi, Ashley, Ghazi, good morning. Good morning. Oh, I'm good, yeah. It's, been a pretty smooth week so far, just getting through a lot of emails and grading tasks, but it's not too bad. Hi, Andres, Caleb, and everyone. Hi, Alyssa, Delilah, Sky, John. Welcome again. Good morning, guys. Hi, Ryan, Angel, Ashley. Just a second here. Leslie, Kimberly, good morning. Okay. Sorry, just trying to get the stream running on my phone. I got it. Okay. Hi, Fernando, and everybody else there. Hey, welcome back, guys. So it's 8:30. I'll just get the class meeting started for now. Thanks, as usual, for your attendance and all your focus on the class. As usual, just feel free to leave behind a comment whenever you have a chance, and I'll just look back at that if I ever need to for any kind of attendance purposes. So we are to the second part of our lecture on Chapter 4. Today we're going to try our best to complete all those notes, and then what we have coming up in the next week you have midterm review session on Tuesday, and then a week from today, that's when you'll take your midterm exam. So I'm going to for sure send off the study guide for that midterm over the weekend, and you can kind of get ready, get prepared, start taking good notes, get whatever questions set up in your mind that you might want to go over, but we'll go over as much as the material as possible on Tuesday, and then you'll just have your exam to take next Thursday in a week. Just another reminder, I have graded all the earlier assignments, the first homework, the first quiz. So anybody who's trying to get their score for that, if you haven't yet checked with me, please feel free, and I'll help you know your score and any comments. I think most of the students have probably sent me that message, just given the number that I've replied to, but some haven't. And so if you'd like to know, let me know anytime, and I'll just inform you. Okay, guys, so let's just return to these notes on Chapter 4. And if you can remember, Chapter 4 is all about knowledge and the limits of knowledge. Okay, so the chapter and the topic, it's all about human knowledge, what it is, how do we get it, what are the things that prevent us from getting knowledge, what's the overall definition of it, and what are some of the key concepts that constitute it. So the first thing we did was we just went into the definition of knowledge, or at least the consensus definition from epistemologists. So let me just kind of bring you back into the topic by asking that for anyone here, if you could let me know in the chat. What is the so-called definition of knowledge? They say that knowledge is a word which refers to three main component parts. There's three criteria or conditions for knowledge. So that's my question to start us off. Let's hear, what is knowledge? And welcome everybody, I see all you guys, so good morning. But yeah, the definition of knowledge, what do you think? This is from the notes of last lecture, and that's just my kind of entry point into our discussion today. So once you give me that, then I'll jump from there to the next point. Okay, so good, Nicole. Yeah, information that we believe, which is true, that's good, and for which we have justification. And so yes, that's exactly the right definition. Knowledge is a justified true belief. And so the idea is that for you to really have knowledge, all three of those conditions must be met. So first of all, you have to think that something is true. That's what it is to believe something, that you just assume or think that it is true. You agree with the information. And then furthermore, though, it actually has to be true. So you have to get it right. That's why, for example, if you fill in the wrong answer on a test, you won't be called the one who knew the answer, because knowing the answer means having a belief, but not one which is incorrect. So you have to have a true belief, but even if you have a true belief, it can't just be that you're guessing. If I'm guessing right now that, you know, my neighbor owns a pair of Air Force Ones and I just happen to be correct, it's not that I know that. It's just like I'm inferring it maybe off of just a general possibility. So you have to have evidence too. You have to have real evidence and justification to back up the true belief. So knowledge requires a combination of all three. And there are different views about where most of the knowledge that we have comes from. That was the next note that we mentioned last time. So some people hold the view called empiricism. Empiricism says that most human knowledge comes from the five senses and the things that we can observe with the five senses. So like sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell, those are the five senses. Empiricists say that those are the primary sources of information about the world, and that's where we get most of our knowledge from, the things that we can see, feel, taste, touch, and hear. On the other hand, though, you have rationalism. Rationalism thinks instead that most human knowledge comes from just pure ideas, reason, and abstract thought. So knowledge that you can derive even if you don't use your five senses, like just thinking in your mind about the geometric figures and their geometric properties, like of a circle or square or triangle, or just thinking of math equations, trigonometry problems, pure logical deduction, and stuff like that in your mind. Anyway, so we discussed how those are two different viewpoints on where most knowledge comes from. And then we just had a brief discussion of what evidence is. Evidence is just anything that can be given as proof or disproof of a claim. Like, so, you know, you might say someone thinks that their partner's cheating and they're like, well, I noticed that you had lipstick like on your collar. Isn't that evidence of this act that you may have done? In the other case, maybe a person could produce receipts showing that they weren't at a particular location to try and disprove a claim that they did something there. So evidence is needed to make justification, and it's also kind of equivalent to the premises of an argument, because premises are the reasons that support a conclusion. And we went over like a couple basic sources of evidence that are generally reliable. So things like direct experience. If you were there and you witnessed something, then of course that's solid evidence that it happened for you. There's also testimony, which is evidence which you get from the words and writings of other people. And there's evidence that's based on memory, which is simply the ability to recall previously perceived or testified information that's, you know, recalled later. And then there's also inference, which would be like drawing a conclusion from another set of facts. Like I just said, for example, seeing the lipstick on the collar could be something that one could use as an inference to the explanation that maybe they had received a kiss from another person. That's not the same thing as having seen the kiss, nor hearing testimony, nor having a memory, of course, but you're drawing a conclusion from another related set of facts. Okay, so after that, the next part of our notes just talks a bit about what are some less reliable sources of evidence, or, you know, if you had to choose, you'd try not to necessarily rely on these. So one way that we can sometimes make errors when we think of evidence and when we process information is when we place too much trust in the total accuracy of our memories. And I know I've said that memory is generally a reliable source, and it is, but that doesn't mean that it's totally infallible, like that you can never have an incorrect recollection of something. So there's a brief mention in the book of the false memory effect. So anyway, here's false memory. False memory is easy to explain in a way, but it's a fascinating thing. It's just any situation where a person thinks they have a memory of something, but it actually didn't happen, or it did not happen in the same way that they think they can remember it. So this is when a person thinks, when one appears, or let me just say this, when one thinks they have a memory of something, false memory. When a person thinks they have a memory of something, but it didn't actually happen, or if it happened, it didn't happen in the same way that their memory appears to recall it. So, you know, we have to rely on our memories. It's what keeps us in touch with the past. If you had no memory at all, then you'd always be at a loss. Like, who am I? Where am I? What is happening? So certainly we have memories, short-term and long-term. But our memories, especially if things are chaotic, complex, or traumatizing, we can sometimes distort the facts, misremember things, or leave out or add key details. Language can also alter the way that we remember things. Sometimes if leading or manipulative questions are given to us, they can shape the way that we actually have memories. There's an example given in the textbook of just asking people a question about how fast two cars were going when they made impact with each other in a car crash. And just by changing the verb relative to how the cars collided, people will change their recollection of how fast they were moving. So if you ask how fast were the cars going when they smashed each other, that leads to an average reported mileage of 42 miles per hour. When you phrase it as how fast were the cars going when they collided, that brings average reported mileage down to 40. How fast were cars going when they bumped? This brings it down to 38. How fast were cars going when they hit? 35. How fast were cars going when they made contact? 32. So this different verbiage changes the average reported mileage from 42 to 32, which is like a factor of 25%. But it's based on the exact same footage being shown to the subjects in all those different cases. So it just is another little reminder that you know, sometimes our memories are not as accurate as we actually think they are, and they can be shaped by social influences and by the testimony that we have from others. False memories will feel just as real as a real memory does, but we have to have a healthy dose of skepticism because as much as 50% of eyewitness reports are sometimes incorrect or at least distorted, and it's the most common case of mistaken conviction in the law. There was a famous case in like the late 80s or early 90s of like an elementary school where a rumor had developed. Some of the parents had heard a rumor that some of the children were perhaps abused by some of the staff at the school. And to investigate this claim, they started interviewing. They brought in law enforcement, which was then interviewing some of the little children and asking them leading questions like, show us on this doll where you were touched and what happened. And basically this ended up leading to a lot of confabulated stories and memories from the young kids. It led to trials, careers were destroyed, schools shuttered. And later it was just discovered that this was all not correct, that it was initially based on a rumor that got out of hand. And then the stories were corroborated through, you know, the authoritative questions given to these young impressionable children by the investigators. So that's not to say though that we should have any kind of innate skepticism about like survivor stories and reports of trauma or abuse. I think the right policy is to trust but verify. At the end of the day, though, it just reminds us again that memories can in fact be incorrect sometimes. There's also this interesting kind of side topic on the same point, which is collective misremembering. I don't know if any of you have ever heard about it, if you like spend enough time on the internet or you've heard about this thing, the Mandela Effect. Anybody know about this? If so, let me know in the chat. But Mandela Effect is a phenomenon where it seems that there's like a collective misremembering of some event or fact in the world. And it's always kind of strange because it seems like everybody has the wrong memory. For example, one classic case of this is the film Star Wars. And in Star Wars, there's a classic line, an iconic line that everyone seems to not have the right memory of, which is when Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker are battling, and Darth Vader says this thing to Luke. He says, blank, I am your father. And in most people's memory, it seems that they recall him saying, Luke, I am your father. But if you go back to the tape, the script, the actual film, you'll see that he never did say that, and he just says, no, I am your father. So how is it that we've all acquired the false memory of the iconic line? I don't know. Perhaps there was like a cultural misremembering that was set off by a touchstone event, like someone misquoting it, and then that became the more dominant way of thinking about the line. The Berenstain Bears instead of well, it is Berenstain Bears, but everyone remembers Bernstein Bears. The thing about that, Ghazi, that's very weird to me because I'm old enough to remember the 80s and when I was a very young kid, and we read those Bernstein Bears stories. I don't know if it's still a thing nowadays. The monocle on the Monopoly guy, yeah. There's a lot of other cases. In Forrest Gump, I guess he says life was like a box of chocolates instead of is. In Field of Dreams, I guess the famous line that everyone thought was, if you build it, they will come, as if you build it, he will come. So anyway, people I think sometimes go overboard with their implications and speculation about this phenomena. Like some people will say, we have branching universes and we used to have this other universe and we shifted or whatever, but no. The real explanation is just that our psychological disposition to remember things and remember them correctly is not 100% perfect. So a good critical thinker will keep that in mind and know that even their own memories are sometimes capable of being interrogated and so forth. Yeah, I don't know, Ghazi, I don't know about that, but stay critical. That's always good. So yeah, let's go ahead then. What are some other unreliable sources of evidence? Well, there's two unreliable sources of evidence that are next highlighted in the book. So let's talk about them. Okay, so mentioned here in the text, there's hearsay and anecdote. Hearsay evidence and anecdotal evidence, or anecdote evidence. So hearsay evidence. This is information which you receive as testimony, but the problem is that it's testimony which passes through several other people before it arrives to you. So okay, so the thing is, it's not like firsthand testimony. It's he said, she said, they said, and then finally someone reports that to you. So like you're farther down the chain of testimony from the original source or events. And this is usually unreliable because it's very hard to remember key details of an even basic scenario. And once that information passes from person to person to person, inevitably, without controls on the veracity of the information when it's being passed, key facts, information, details can be omitted or other details added. And that's not necessarily just because everyone's trying to manipulate the information and change it or deceive you, but rather it's just because we have a tendency not to hold on to every salient detail in a piece of information. Maybe some of you have ever heard of the so-called telephone game. If you have, let me know in the chat, but I'll just start explaining it too. The telephone game is this game that is sometimes played in like elementary school or classroom settings. I've done it in critical thinking classes when we have face-to-face meetings in the past too, just to show the point here. But you take like a simple piece of information, a little script, you whisper it into the ear of one person on the side of the class, and then the direction is they're supposed to like whisper the same piece of information to the next member of the class, and that's supposed to snake its way around until we get to the end. And then you compare the content that the message began with at the start to whatever the last person reports. And it's always like far different, it's often humorously so. So like, in a given case, I'll pass along a script to the class, something pretty easy to remember, not too many details, like Johnny was a soccer player and he played every day, but one day he got a spider bite on his leg. It caused his leg to swell up and he had to quit playing soccer. And to this day, he still hasn't fully recovered. If you just say that, right, then by the time it goes through like even a number of people, like 20 people, the version of it at the end is like Johnny loves sports and something happened to him, just something really almost completely out of order from the real original statement. So again, you owe it to yourself to have a little bit of skepticism if you receive information through this kind of hearsay method of testimony. Think of gossip and rumors. You know, like there's a guy or a girl, whatever, or somebody who has a partner and they're seen at like a social event talking to somebody else. And like some people that are just observing it say, oh, look, do you think that maybe he's having like a side relationship with this person and not telling his girlfriend because they look pretty like friendly over there talking near the, coffee table by themselves. And then they pass that to another person and someone's like, yeah, I heard someone so-and-so told me that they saw these two people making out at the party. And then that kind of keeps changing. And then finally, when the version of the story hits somebody that knows the other individual, it's a confabulated version of events. So rumor, gossip, etc. Those are kind of like examples of hearsay. And generally, those are less reliable. So if you get hearsay evidence, you want to double check it against other available sources of evidence and testimony, because it's not always necessarily the best high quality, accurate information to use. Now, in a court of law, they sometimes say that hearsay can be admissible, but it's not necessarily the strongest evidence to use if that's the only source. So if you have hearsay, but it's also been corroborated by other available evidence, then that kind of can help add credibility to it. But in the general course of things, if that's all you have to go on, you should be skeptical of hearsay. Okay, there's also sorry, let me say one thing, I misspelled it. Can we just correct our notes? I didn't mean to misspell it, obviously. Anecdote. Anecdote, just didn't have the letter C at first, my bad. But yeah, so anecdote. What is anecdotal evidence? Anecdote is just evidence, but it's based on one person's personal experience. So evidence that's based on one person's personal experience. Okay, so anecdotal evidence. This is another one of those unreliable sources, and I find that this one is always a problem because people sometimes trust these anecdotes more than scientific evidence or well-sourced academic research. So, for example, suppose that someone is being told, you ought to stop smoking. I see that you smoke, and it's really bad for you. Down the line, you could get really sick, get cancer. You should have a life that's full and healthy. So I think for you, smoking's not good. And suppose the person comes back at them like this. Oh, come on, you're telling me smoking's so bad? You believe all that nonsense? Well, I'll tell you this. None of that is true. For example, look at my grandpa. My grandpa, he smoked his whole life, a heavy smoker, and to this day, he's 80 years old and he's still smoking, but he's like a bull. This is one of the healthiest people I've ever seen. My old grandpa. So don't tell me that smoking's bad. Tell my grandpa how bad it is. And, he'll do like 20 push-ups right in front of you, whatever. Okay. So someone might give you like a little story like that, like about their grandfather who's had a great health despite his heavy smoking habit. But the problem is that with anecdotal stories and evidence, they oftentimes are not reflective of the general case. Sometimes they're outliers, sometimes they're atypical. And therefore, when people rely on them as evidence, they're not giving you the most balanced and reasonable assessment of facts. You could have a person that says, everyone says COVID's so dangerous and, go out there and never kind of gather with people and worry about it all the time. But I don't know, I had a friend that got it and they didn't even really notice it. They had no symptoms. They were just back at work a few days later. So I really don't think it's that bad. Well, once again, you're just using one anecdote. And as you know from this disease, it's highly variable in the way that the symptoms manifest from person to person. So if you just go off of that one random anecdote, you might not be getting the right information and making the right decisions based on them. You make decisions based on the facts and evidence that you have. But if you're taking anecdotal evidence or hearsay as your primary source of evidence, then you're going to make unwise and foolish decisions because this is not solid evidence. You could have another case. You're applying for a job and you want to know about the company. So you ask one person that you know who works there, and they just tell you, don't apply. I would just say, you know what, take it from me, I'm doing you a favor, apply somewhere else, because this job is really, really tough. The people here are not very nice. It's very demanding work, long hours and everything. So I kind of regret that I work here myself. You hear that person's story and then you make a different decision. Or maybe with respect to applying for a school or something. You have a friend that goes there, they say it's not a great place to study. But if you had maybe talked to other people at the same workplace and you got a more widespread sense of it, maybe everyone would say, oh, well, that one person, that's an outlier, you know, they're one of the worst employees. But for the most part, we all love it here. So anyway, don't just go off of one person's story or one sample of experience. Anecdotal evidence is sometimes drawn from your own experience, and sometimes it's drawn from another person with whom you're interacting, their experience. But in the end, you usually need more evidence than just something like that. A personal story, personal histories, and so forth are not always indicative of the mainstream of cases. All right, so unreliable sources of evidence there, hearsay, anecdote. Well, one good place to go for information and credible testimony is talking to experts. So if you have access to experts, it's always good to pick their brain and learn about the thing that they have so much expertise on. But not even all experts are created equal, and sometimes even experts can disagree. You know, so you can have like competing studies coming out from two different research institutes, both with qualified experts, which are not in agreement with each other. And we see that sometimes. Like one research project will come out and it will say a glass of wine each night helps to promote heart health. And so it's actually not too bad to have a moderate small amount of wine alcohol intake. Another study from a different research institute says we've got a different methodology and our research indicates that it's actually not good for you and you'd be better off not drinking anything. So who are you going to believe then when you have two different findings from two contradictory results? Well, to help you measure the credibility of an expert, there's different things, 4 factors that are mentioned in the book that you might consider when you judge the credibility of the expert's testimony. So 4 factors to consider about experts. Factors to consider about experts. So what we're going to mention here is number 1, education. Then there's experience, reputation, and accomplishments. Okay, so first of all, education. With an expert, the person's going to have some type of formal education on the topic that they're claiming this expertise in. And so you would want to know about it and how much education and where. Like what level of attainment does the person have? Is this a bachelor's degree holder, master's degree, PhD, medical doctor, professional certificate? What kind of training and educational background gives the person standing to talk about this topic? And generally, the more, the better. But it's also not just how much education, but from where, because obviously not every academic pedigree is the same. Some schools have greater reputations than others. Like places that have brick and mortar campuses, like Cal State Fullerton, are usually a higher esteem than a purely online school, like DeVry or the ITT Tech or something. So you want to consider not just the level of education, but where. And that's something that can be a tie-breaking factor if you have 2 different experts, but one is more well-educated, or at least more well-educated on the topic, then you might defer to their expertise more than the other. Okay, there's also experience, which is distinct, because experience means how much time do you have working in the profession or field with the education that you've attained. So it's possible for someone to have the highest quality education from like an Ivy League institution, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, Dartmouth, but then to be fresh out of grad school or fresh out of college and not having yet worked too much in the field. So that's an additional point to consider. And of course, there are some people that are very experienced, but they don't have as much formal education. So these 2 things can kind of be weighed against each other too, and compared. Next up, there's reputation, and that's also important. So this means, how is this person viewed by other experts and peers within their own profession. Is this an individual who's looked at as a mainstream, reliable figure, or are they seen as kind of like an outlier who deviates from like standards of judgment that are normal inside of that actual discipline? Knowing about the individual's reputation can help make another good point of evaluation on their credibility, which is different again, because you can have someone with a great education and a lot of experience professionally, but whose reputation is trash among others in the field. So you have to consider that too. And finally, accomplishments, meaning does this person have any awards, titles, publications, which give further evidence of their professional judgment and expertise? The more, the better. So if this person has a long publication record and like some academic awards to go with it, then that's going to further boost the credibility that they bring to any discussion about the topic that they're an expert on. So when you have two different experts, then you can measure their expertise by considering how they compare along these different metrics here, okay? And here's the thing too, when you deal with experts, don't allow confirmation bias to give you a lower threshold of proof. Sometimes when there's a pet hypothesis that you just hope is true, you'll go out and you'll find like the first so-called expert that agrees with you so that you feel like you've got confirmation. But don't let confirmation bias weaken the standards of evidence that you think are appropriate to have justification on a given topic. Okay, so try to find the best evidence. The credibility of your evidence is higher if it's confirmed by multiple other sources of evidence as well. Again, do not let confirmation bias cause you to accept a lower standard of proof, like just taking the first study, regardless of its quality. If it verifies your own view, then you just fasten on that and use that as your sole basis of evidence. So we hate being wrong. We hate to reconsider our prior beliefs, but we always have to be willing to do that and just follow the evidence wherever it leads. Okay, so the next part of chapter 4 talks about what are some different resources that you can use to find information when you're doing research. Part of having knowledge is finding information and doing research. If there's something that you want to know about, you're going to have to go out there and get the information because it's not already in your mind. But where to go? Where to go when you're looking for reliable facts and information to inform yourself about any topic in the world? Well, there's a couple mentioned in the book, so let me just go through them. And this is labeled research resources. Okay, so what are some resources to use when you do research? There's always the library. Now, of course, this book and this information predates the pandemic and everything. So, you know, going to the physical library, I'm not sure you have the option in a lot of cases right now. But anyway, as a student at a college, either, you know, you either do have some kind of access to like a interlibrary loan request system, or you will have it again soon because, you know, we will all be vaccinated, I think, relatively soon. I know you guys are in a young age group, but they say that all Americans will be able to have a dose by the end of May. So I'm thinking that there will be a lot of return to in-person instruction and public gatherings in the next year or so. So anyway, back to the point, libraries. If you go to a library, physical library, it's a great place to study. They're usually quiet and serene and a nice place for you to have clear thoughts. And of course, you can request all the different materials from the library. If it's not there at the library itself, then there's an interlibrary loan system where you can request books throughout the whole Cal State library system. So use all the resources made available to you. Libraries are a great, you know, time-honored institution where we can just partake of all this books, literature, and knowledge for free. So that's one great source of information for research. There's also academic journals. So no matter what subject you're interested in doing research or studying, whether it's physics, astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, history, any subject in the academy that you can possibly imagine, there's going to be a certain number of academic journals devoted just to high-level research and scholarship on that topic. So those are always very high quality. If you read professional academic journals, it's written by, you know, a bunch of academics, professors, and other professionals. And it's quite hard for people to get placed in these journals. If you know a little bit about publication, academic publication, there's a high rejection rate. So you have to submit like a manuscript to be reviewed by their referees. And I mean, I've been published a few times in journals, but I've been rejected also quite a few times. And for a paper to survive the gauntlet of peer review and make it into a venue of an academic journal, it has to be some of the highest quality and thoroughly vetted research. So anything you read there, you know, is going to be cutting edge, high quality, and thoroughly well researched. The only issue, I guess, the only drawback is that academic journals are written for an audience of fellow specialists in a way. So sometimes it's quite intimidating and high level, but if you're willing to take an intellectual challenge and you really want to get to the kind of cutting edge research in a field, then academic journals are a good place to go. These can be viewed online. Sometimes you can subscribe to them, and in other cases you can request them from physical libraries too. Okay, so academic journals. There's also government documents. Okay, so the government has all kinds of different agencies which are tasked with the responsibility to inform the public about whatever information falls within the purview of their agency. So, I mean, if you want to know about crime statistics, then you might look at Department of Justice crime figures that are made available for the public. If you want to know about climate and meteorology, then you might look at the Environmental Protection Agency. Or if you want to know about labor statistics, you could go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and see what's going on there. So all these different agencies serve the public, and since we pay for them with our taxpayer money, we should take full advantage of all the information that they disseminate and provide. Sometimes also unclassified or leaked government documents can reach the public domain, either through media leaks or through the declassification process. And you can also find some of those documents sometimes, which are interesting. Freedom of Information Act requests sometimes lead to the declassification of such documents. In other cases, they're leaked. One good website where I find stuff like that is scrib.com. So like whenever some interesting, newly accessible document from the government comes down to the public, you can find it on a website like this, Scrib. But anyway, government documents, another good source of evidence. Now, I guess if you were living in a dysfunctional government where the people were being deceived by the institutional agencies, then you would not necessarily place such trust in them. But at least in the United States, we have very durable institutions and career professionals working there. So even though there can be political influence over some of the information, I guess, in some cases, the United States government, I think, is generally reliable with its professional, non-political government professionals. Okay, so next up, there's always the internet, which I guess in a way, for most of us as young people, this current generation, that's probably your primary source of research in most cases. You always know you can do a Google search and just go down the rabbit hole of information online and find your own body of research that way. But with the internet, as you probably know, you do have to also be a little bit careful about the availability of false, misleading, and even just satirical and trolling type of content. It's easy for a person to be confused into thinking that something which is made by an unprofessional blogger carries the same kind of weight and evidence status as professionally sourced piece of mainstream journalism. So on the internet, there's really no monitor or control to say, hey, this is false and this isn't. So you have to make sure you do your own fact checking. Sometimes go and look through Snopes and make sure that this isn't just something that's already been debunked, and check it against other available sources of reliable information too. Okay, so that's the internet. There's the expert interview. So if you have access to experts, and in fact you do as college students, all your professors would be experts at least on the topic that they teach in the academy. So if you have a chance to sit down with a person who has expert knowledge, professional experience, then picking their brain about the topic that they're so knowledgeable about is always another good way to get information for research purposes. If they'll let you do it, you can record and take good notes in all cases. So that's some good research resources. And kind of going together with that, the textbook says that once you find a piece of evidence from any of those different sources, you find a piece of information from any of those different sources, you want to engage in yet a further analysis of its credibility. And so they offer in the book this acronym. It's a bit of an awkwardly labeled acronym, but it's the CRAP test, C-R-A-A-P. An acronym is just like a series of letters that spell out something that looks like a word, and each of the letters stands for a concept. So the CRAP test is like a 5-point test to use to determine whether a given piece of evidence or information is reliable or how credible it is. So now we mention this acronym. So each letter stands for a different word, which will help us to remember the method of adjudicating the credibility of information. So C stands for currency. And when we say currency, we're not talking about like dollar bills and banknotes of that kind, but rather currency in the sense of how current. So is the information new? Is it recent? Is it up to date? How current it is would make a difference towards how much weight that you would place upon it. Like suppose that someone was trying to convince you that global warming isn't real, but what they're doing is they're showing you weather data from 1920 to 1940. And it's like, look, there's no increase at all in those 20 years. So, I mean, how can you really say that we're in the middle of global warming? Well, if you actually look at the real long stretch of time going from like the 1850s when we started keeping meteorological data till the current day, you see that the global temperatures all start to spike up and hit the all-time highs in the 21st century in like the last 20 years. So that would be outdated information that would not really be relevant to the current case. Sometimes I see people on social media trying to advance an argument and then they link to an article, but the article is from like 10 years ago and they're trying to make a point about something that's happening in the world today. So oftentimes you have to double check to make sure that this information is recent enough to have relevance to the facts and issues that we're debating now. Okay, so that's currency. R is for relevance. Meaning, is the information on the same topic as what you are trying to research about or not? And if it's not relevant to the topic of research, then clearly it's not to be used. Suppose that you're interested in the occurrence of hurricanes and why they've become a little bit more intense during hurricane season in the last 15, 20 years. And you're looking at marriage statistics and you're seeing that the divorce rate has gradually increased from like, 1900 until today. And now today it's almost like a 50% divorce rate. And so you're like, well, divorce has been increasing at the same time as these hurricanes. So maybe there's an association between them. Maybe that can cause it somehow. But obviously these two things are totally unrelated. One has to do with the social fact concerning the institution of marriage, and the other has to do with weather patterns and meteorology. So you have to at least make sure that when you're doing research, you find information that bears on the topic that you're trying to study. Sometimes people just get lost because they go off on a tangent looking at information that doesn't even really have anything to do with what they're trying to learn about. Okay, and then you have these two letters A. The first one, A, is for authority. And what that means is who gave this information and what authority do they have to speak about it? Is this a person who's a professional expert with education and training on the topic? Or is this just like a blogger with, a big opinion and no real factual or objective knowledge on it? So lots of times people speak and sometimes offer like very opinionated views, but they're not themselves authoritative experts. So you want to also consider the source and what kind of level of credibility they could bring to a discussion or what level of authority they have to talk about it. And then the second letter A is just for accuracy. That kind of almost goes without saying, but we will say accuracy means just how truthful, factual, and correct the information is. Sometimes you're looking at information, whether you're finding it online or anywhere else, and you take it seriously, but it's actually meant as a joke, or it's like a piece of satire. Sometimes the information that is presented isn't even intended as some piece of serious and credible research. So make sure that you take view of its accuracy. Again, double check against available fact-checking sources. There's all kinds of like PolitiFact and Snopes, etc. Double check the accuracy, because if it's false and misleading or satirical or whatever, then it's a non-starter. And then finally, the letter P is for purpose. Purpose meaning, why was this information generated in the first place? What was the purpose that the information was created? Is it simply to inform people in an unbiased, neutral way? Or is there another purpose behind it? Like, is someone trying to sell a product with this information? Or is somebody trying to advance an ideological or political agenda with this information? Knowing that will help you to determine whether you should have, the same level of trust and credibility and credence in that information or not. For example, I have people in my life, some that I really care about, that in a few cases have gotten swept up in these these diet fads and stuff, so like really getting too far into like the whole wellness movement and trying every new diet that comes out there. And in some cases, they'll say to me, yeah, you really got to try this new diet, where people only eat potatoes, or you got to try this diet where like, you eliminate all this other stuff from your regimen of food, only eat meat, don't ever eat a vegetable, just really extreme and out there diets. And sometimes I'll be like, okay, well, who's the one telling that this is a good idea? And I'll be pointed to like some YouTube channel where there's like a guy who claims he's a scientist or doctor. And then if you look at what they're saying, you'll always notice in a lot of cases that they're also trying to sell like a diet plan, or they're trying to sell like a smoothie or protein shake, or a book where the book gives you like a 10-point method for improving your health. So knowing that someone's trying to hawk a product out there on the free market, and then they present themselves as this expert so that they can make money, you should already be a little bit skeptical about whether this is just neutral and unbiased information. The best place to take information from are like, academic sources, where their whole job is merely to produce information of an academic kind and not to sell products, win elections, or other things like that. Okay, so the crab test. Whenever you look at a piece of information from any of the available sources, measure it against some of these qualities to see whether you should take it seriously and incorporate it into your evidence base. All right, we're done with that. So the next part of chapter 4 is a discussion of what are some different cognitive and perceptual errors that people can make. Like when the mind tries to process information, there are some common errors that you, I, any of us can make. Knowing what those errors can be, either errors in the way we perceive or the way we judge things, will allow us to better prevent ourselves from committing such errors, so we can kind of keep tabs on our own mental habits. So we're going to talk about cognitive and perceptual errors. As a kind of segue into the topic, the book refers to this little episode in American history, the War of the Worlds broadcast. War of the Worlds broadcast. So I don't know if any of you guys have heard about this, or if you happen to have read that part of the chapter, but let me know. This is an event that happened in October 30th of 1938. Anybody? Any background knowledge on the War of the Worlds thing? Let me ask that really quick while we're here. Let me know in that chat. If you heard about it, just shout it out and let me know, just to see if I'm telling you for the first time, or if there's anyone here that has a kind of background knowledge on this. War of the Worlds? What do you say? Yay, nay, ever heard of it? Not really? Okay, yeah, well, that's not bad. Okay, Violetta, you say you never heard of it. Maybe some others. No takers? Okay, not heard of it. All right, cool. Well, good. So let me say this is what happened. Okay, so the year is 1938. Television is not yet a thing. That's at least 10 years away. 1950s, a lot of American households start to have television. That's the newly invented technology at that time. So before that, 30s and stuff, if you wanted to listen to news or have entertainment or sports with your family, sitting around the house, after dinner, you wouldn't have been watching a TV, but you'd be listening to the radio. So radio was like the staple of the American household, where you could tune into stuff, and not watch, but hear. And so without, visual media, the radio just allowed you to have like a color commentator doing the sports, like, oh, he's knocked it out of the park, while they're covering baseball or something, or, like news, weather. And in some cases, they would broadcast voice acting of like a play or novel. So instead of having like actors that you would see on screen, as with the television or movie theater, you'd have people voice acting out like a narrative from like a book or whatever in some cases. So there was this science fiction novel, I think by Orson Welles, called War of the Worlds. Since then, there's been a movie made about it with Tom Cruise, actually, I think. But anyway, War of the Worlds was a novel. It's just a fiction. And the plot line of it was Martians from planet Mars were going to come to planet Earth, and they were invading the planet Earth, attacking us, and the flying saucers were here and waging a big attack on humanity. So anyway, some people who had tuned into this radio broadcast, I guess, missed the initial disclaimer at the beginning that this is all fictional and not to be confused with real facts or news. And some people tuning in mistakenly interpreted this as a news report. And so people were in a panic. Some people were in a panic. They thought, oh my God, they're telling us the Martians are here, the aliens are attacking. And it produced such cognitive distortion of the way that they were seeing the world that some people even reported that they could like see these flying saucers. Like, wait, can you see over there? I think I see on the distant horizon. That's one of them right there. According to some rumored accounts of it, even a couple people lost their mind, committed suicide in the heights of the panic that they were experiencing. I don't know. I've heard others say that might be a bit of a sensationalized account of it. But at the end of the day, some people certainly panicked, and it produced a minor, episode in our country. So what's the lesson to take away from this? That the way we perceive the world can be powerfully shaped, easily distorted by the social influences that we have. Nobody sitting by themselves alone would have thought, oh, aliens are here. But because you hear a radio broadcast and you take it as an authoritative source, it can actually shape your perception around the belief that it's happening. So we have to know that the way we perceive the world can be shaped by all kinds of outside factors, and cognitive and perceptual errors are real. So we want to know what those possible errors can be so that we can do a little bit better job and not fall prey to them when they happen. So the brain is not just a passive receptacle. It actively creates a picture of the world out of the raw material that is given to us in sense data. So sometimes they filter out things from our experience that don't seem important. And in other cases, they fill in the gaps in missing information. So one of these cognitive and perceptual errors, now we're going to list them and go into them. Cognitive and perceptual errors. Cognitive and perceptual errors. Okay, so cognitive, meaning having to do with thought, cognition, consciousness. Perceptual, having to do with perception. Both are errors in thinking and errors in the way we can process information. So one of them is this: it's misperception of random data. Misperception of random data. So this is when something is actually random and not ordered and not structured, but the brain tries to impose structure or order on it, or a pattern, which is not actually there. So this is when we appear to see order or pattern in something which is actually random. Okay, so it's the misperception that something which is random actually does have a structure. So the brain actually hates an absence of meaning or order. And therefore, sometimes when there is no given structure in something, the brain will apply a kind of pattern or order to it, which is not actually there in reality. Think of, for example, if you have a person with a very creative imagination and they're looking up at the clouds, they may say, hey, doesn't that cloud look just like a butterfly or a submarine or, an airplane? And obviously, the accumulation of water vapor in the Earth's atmosphere is not itself a product of an artist intended to represent any figure or shape or object. So in this case, it's just a manifestation of the water vapor, and we are seeing an order in it that is not really there. And I mean, that might be innocent enough, but other examples, like, seeing the face of the man on the moon, obviously that's just the discoloration in the pattern of crater impacts on the moon's lunar surface. Sometimes, a person may look at satellite imagery of a hurricane and think that they see the face of like a demonic figure, like, oh, are we being punished because this looks like it's like like some kind of demon in the cloud formation. Once again, no such thing exists. Sometimes stress or fear can influence the tendency that we have to misperceive random data. Like, I don't know, suppose that you just saw like a really scary film or whatever, and you're feeling a little jumpy and anxious afterwards. You're walking back to your car after that, and it's late at night, and you kind of walk a little more quickly because even shadows that you see cast about on neighboring walls and stuff might be misinterpreted at that time as like a sinister figure lurching around or walking around in the dark. Little children, of course, with hyperactive imaginations sometimes have a hard time sleeping because if there's like, noises or a tree branch or something that's casting shadows or tapping the wall, they'll perceive this as though it's some kind of like a sinister figure that's trying to threaten them like a monster. So anyway, we should make sure that we don't appear to import a structure to a system that's not actually got any structure or order itself. You've heard people say they can see like a face of a divine or religious figure in like a discolored piece of toast or like a piece of tree bark. So the brain, of course, wants there to be an order, but sometimes we apply it when there's not actually any there, and that can lead us to make wrong conclusions and incorrect inferences. In many of the examples I've given here, it's kind of harmless, but in more consequential cases, we don't want to make the same kind of mistake. It's sort of like the example of the Rorschach test, except in the case of the Rorschach test, everybody knows that that's just a random splotch of ink, and your brain is the thing that's creating the order or the appearance of order in it. But we do that sometimes not just in these controlled settings like the Rorschach test. We can do that in everyday life. So be alert and aware of that tendency to seek order when in fact there's no such thing. Okay, so that's one of the cognitive and perceptual errors, misperception of random data. The next one that's talked about here is memorable events error. Okay, so memorable events error is a phenomenon that happens because the brain more easily remembers events that stand out from the ordinary. If I ask you, I don't know, like what's something that was like a big moment that everyone can kind of remember? Do you think the Capitol riots was important enough that we all have like a clear memory of what we were doing on that day? I would think so. To me, it had a pretty visceral impact. I'm old enough to remember 9/11 and stuff, so if I was talking to people my age and stuff, I would say, hey, we all remember that day, right? But you guys, most of you are way too young to have any memory of that. Anyway, though, like another example, your last birthday, right? For you, I'm sure you remember your own birthday because it's like an important day on the calendar, and you usually do something a little special or at least have a nice, different kind of schedule on that day. So if I ask you how was your last birthday, you could probably tell me some details. But if I just ask you, what were you doing on the first Monday of last July? Or maybe that's not good because it could have been July 4th. I don't know, I'll pick a random date. What about July 11th last year? Assuming that's not your birthday. What were you doing 2020 July 11th? Well, for you to know that, unless you already had something special on that date, like that was the day of someone's wedding or someone else's birthday or some event you had planned, you'd probably have to go back into your like social media accounts or your photo reel to find evidence of what you were really doing, because it just kind of passed out of your memory since it was just not a memorable event. So we remember things more easily that stand out from the ordinary, that are a little bit atypical or uncommon, but that can actually lead to this error. So what I'll define it as is this. It's when you place more importance on an event than it deserves just because it's uncommon. Okay, so more significance on an event than it deserves. Just because the event is uncommon. Okay, memorable events error. Giving more importance or significance to an event than it actually deserves just because it's unusual or uncommon. Here's an example the book gives, and I'll mention a few things like this. So with a plane crash, like an aviation accident, that's pretty rare. We have a very good track record of successful aviation and air travel in this country for sure. In fact, I think our record over the last few years is some of the best it's ever been statistically, some of the fewest deaths and injuries traveling by air in all of history, and even before that, it's been pretty reliable too. So, on the other hand, take car accidents, right? Automobile accidents on the roads. That's not uncommon. That's something that happens all the time. And if you drive or commute at all, like me, or even if you don't, you probably can see an accident almost every day on the roads. You know, a person with their car either smashed or disabled, and in some cases even worse, on fire. Not uncommon to see that. So because car accidents are an everyday thing and they're a commonplace thing, they're usual to us, they're normal, and we get used to them, and so we stop paying much attention to them. On the other hand, since plane crashes are totally out of the ordinary and they only happen on a very rare occasion, whenever one does happen, we notice it and we pay a lot more attention to it because of its relative infrequency. So that means that because of the plane crash, which is unusual, we place more importance on it and we worry about it more than the much more common case of an automobile accident. And so maybe you've heard this, and it's true, that you have a greater likelihood of dying or getting injured traveling by automobile than by plane, by a significant factor. You're way likelier to die driving over towards the airport than you are on the flight itself that you take when you get there. That's just if you take this statistical operation of using the numerator, the number of people who die using that method of transport, and the denominator, the total number of people who take that method of transport. So the odds are in your favor by flying rather than driving, but because the plane crash is less usual, less common, and the car crash is more common, people have greater degree of fear and anxiety about flying than they do about driving. But if we were proportioning our fear and worry to the thing that was more threatening to us, then we would be more concerned about driving than flying. Okay, so once again, we're making a kind of error here, attaching so much fear, anxiety, concern to something just because that's an unusual and an uncommon event. And in fact, we're getting our wires crossed, being more worried about the less harmful and dangerous thing and less worried about the more harmful and dangerous thing. So like when people fly, if you know someone or if you fly, oftentimes if you have loved ones and stuff, someone will say this, call me or text me when you land, you know, because it's like, I want to make sure you landed safely. But nobody says when you're driving to the airport, call me, text me when you get to the airport. I just want to make sure that you had a safe drive over there. And again, you could call this a memorable events error. Now, certainly, if you're in a car accident versus being in a plane accident, the fatality and lethality of the plane accident is obviously much more severe and likelier to die if it happens. But it's still so rare to happen that even if we account for the ratio of people who travel that way versus those that are harmed, it's still a safer bet flying. Another case I can think of is this. So shootings by like mass shooters in the United States, that's a real problem, or at least it had been a real problem. I think now with everything locked down, it's happening less. So I don't know if that's a silver lining to the lockdowns, but I guess we would still rather be out in public because more people die from COVID than anything else anyway. So all that aside though, the mass shooting phenomena was pretty much happening a lot, and a lot of schools would have shootings and stuff on a regular basis. So that was happening with pretty much a lot of frequency. So it's as sad as it is to say, people almost started getting numb to it. Like just, okay, mass shootings, that's just a part of American life. I guess we just have to accept it, which we shouldn't accept. You know, we should try to change our law and cultures, I think, a little to make that less prevalent. But anyways, it did become quite common. Now, what's not so common is like an international terrorist attack from like, you know, an international terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or something. So those things are unlikely to happen. If you look at statistics, the chance that you're going to die in an international terrorist attack versus like a domestic shooting, it's way, way less likely that a domestic terrorist attack is going to hurt you than a domestic shooter. But since that is less common, people focus more on it. And we're willing to change our laws, traditions, civil liberties to deal with the threat of international terrorism. But it seems like we're not willing to do much of anything to stop, crazy people piling up weapons and wanting to shoot a bunch of people in public for no good reason that are just American citizens. So you're likelier to get killed by some American with a big weapon than an international terrorist. But people are more afraid of the thing that's less likely to happen just because it's more memorable when it happens. So again, that's memorable events error, a couple of examples of it. Try to just basically have a rational assessment of risk. If something is risky, act accordingly, but don't merely assign the threat to something that's memorable rather than actually likely to harm you. Okay. So that's another of these so-called cognitive or perceptual errors. And next is the probability error. Okay, so probability error, this one I think is kind of not too hard to explain. It's just when you give the wrong estimate of the probability of some event by a wide margin. So when you give an incorrect estimate of the probability of the odds of an event by a wide margin. Probability error. So given this definition, there's actually two different ways of committing this error. You can have an error of overestimation, or you can have an error of underestimation. So you make a probability error of the first kind, overestimating, if you think that something is likelier to happen than it actually is. So you think you're overestimating the probability. On the other hand, you can also make the error in the opposite direction by thinking that something is less likely to happen than it actually is, and that would be underestimating the probability of it. One easy example to give of probability error is the so-called gambler's fallacy. Okay, so sometimes when people are gambling, they stop thinking rationally because they get caught up in the moment thinking I'm on a roll, or the law of averages is going to save me or something. But let me walk you through, I hope, an easy example. Say I've got a coin with me. I'm flipping a coin. It's a fair coin with two sides, heads and tails. So if I flip this coin, what do you say is the probability it's going to land tails? That one I hope is not too bad. But just let me know the answer. Coin flip, question, what probability is it tails that it's going to land? That one, you should tell me, what is it? When flipping a coin, what chance is it that it'll land heads or tails, whatever? Take a wild guess. Yes, it's 50%. It's 50% because there's two faces, and it has to land on one of those two. And if it's a just neutral fair coin, there's no way of predicting which side. So it's 50-50. Okay, so say you flip that coin, it lands heads. Okay, flip it again, it lands heads twice. You flip it a third time, and just by chance, it's heads 3 times in a row. So you have heads, 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 3 first trials in the sequence. Now here's my question. What's the probability that it's going to be heads on the 4th flip? We had heads 3 times in a row. Now we're on the 4th trial of flipping the coin. What's the probability that it will be heads in this instance? On the 4th repetition of flipping the coin. Is it a different number, or is it still 50%? That's just a question. Yes, that's right. It's still 50. Okay, so if you're thinking, well, the other 3 were heads, so maybe the odds are different now. It's not different. It's the same coin flip action as was done on flip 1. So what would be a probability error would be a person thinking like this. Okay, it was heads 3 times, so heads is hot. Heads is on a roll. So now if I bet heads on the 4th trial, I have a greater chance of winning because it seems like heads is just on a hot streak right now. Obviously, that's not the case. The probability of the current flip cannot have anything to do with the prior trials. It's not like this coin can consider the fact that it has already landed heads 3 times and therefore have a greater disposition to land the same way again. Each individual trial of flipping the coin is a 50% proposition, unaffected by all other coin flips before or after it. On the other hand, you might be thinking, well, it's less likely to be heads because we had heads 3 times, and so the law of averages should kick in and tails should pop up because over the long term, we should have a 50-50 distribution of heads and tails. Well, there is such a thing as the law of averages, but if you thought that it meant that this flip is less likely to be heads, that would be confusing the odds of a sequence of trials averaging to 50% over the long run of trials with the odds associated with an individual instance of flipping it within the sequence. So each individual flip has a 50-50 probability of either side showing. But of course, if we had a number of flips to flip the coin, we would imagine that over the long stretch of time, it should average out to 50% in the long run. But in that 50%, long run average, you could have streaks of whatever length. It'd be low probability for them to go for very long, but we cannot make any predictions about the odds changing from trial to trial. So anyway, that's probability error in the gambler's fallacy. Like in Vegas, for example, say that someone's betting on a roulette table, and if you know about roulette, there's basically 2 colors, red and black, and there's like 2 slots that are green. But it's basically 50-50 almost if you bet red or black, and that's your whole bet. The 2 green slots make it so that it's not quite 50-50, so that the house has just slightly better odds, which ensures that over the long run, the house always wins and profits from the casino. But suppose that you bet on red, and you're like, yes, I won. Red came up. And you bet on red twice. The second time, you won again. You should not be thinking either of these 2 things on the 3rd spin. Well, I better triple down on red because red seems to be coming up for me. There's no likelihood one way or the other that it's going to be more or less likely on the 3rd trial. Nor should you think, like I said before with the coin flip, that black is due or something. So anyways, that's in the case of gambling. We sometimes commit the gambler's fallacy in our everyday lives too. Sometimes we'll think of something as having to have a supernatural or a paranormal explanation because we thought that it was just so unlikely probability-wise for it to occur. And that's not necessarily a safe assumption. So like, suppose you're thinking of a person, you just have a random thought of them in your mind. And then at that same moment, the person texts you or sends you a message. Now, if that happens, some people might just jump to this conclusion. There's weird supernatural forces at work here. This is like ESP, because how could it possibly be that I think of them and they text me? I mean, the probability of that is so low that it can only be explained by some kind of occult phenomenon. But the person who's thinking this way is ignoring all those other unremembered episodes where you had a thought of a person and they did not try to reach out to you or contact you in any way. See, those don't get filed under memory because they're not memorable events, and so you forget about them. But if you had kept those in mind, then you'd know that what we actually have here is a numerator of like 1 case of thinking about a person while they actually did call you, and a denominator of like innumerably many other cases where such a phenomenon did not happen. And seeing it this way would give you the right way of looking at it, that this is actually probable given the number of times that such thoughts occur, combined with no one having tried to contact you. So another case of the probability error, I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try it maybe because it's mentioned in the book and I think it's kind of fun class example. So here, let's see. We have a few minutes left, and here's how we're going to finish this meeting, by the way. There's like 2 leftover vocabulary items that I would like to mention, maybe just two or 3 at the very end. And so I'll include those at the beginning of the meeting on Tuesday when we come back for our review session. And I'll also put those leftover terms in the study guide. So we'll talk about them and we'll review them too. But for the end of today's meeting, I just want to go into one last example about the probability error. Okay, so what about it? Does anybody in this class have a January birthday? So if you have a January birthday, put the date. Let's see. And if nobody has it, then I guess we'll find that out. So just let me know, January birthday, yes or no. If the answer is no, put no. If the answer is yes, then put the date. So let's just see if anything comes out. If nothing else, I should see a bunch of no's. Okay. No. Any January birthdays. If there's even one, put the date. Only you know your birthday, not me, not the others. Okay, I see a January 27th. That's Yelka. Happy just recently passed birthday, I guess. It's been about a month, though, so it's been a while. Okay, so we just have only Yelka. Is that it? Nobody else? Okay, not to worry. Sorry, Yelka, I couldn't find a person with the same birthday as you, but we're going to keep trying. So how about this? Is any February birthdays? If you have a February birthday, list it, but please put the date so I know I'm not confusing you with the January people. So like put 2/ whatever the date would be. And if you do not have a February birthday, then just put no. Any February people? Let's see those dates if you have a February. 2/ whatever. Nobody? Okay, all right. But if you have it, okay, I see a 2/2, AJ, Groundhog's Day. Do you remember what the Groundhog said this year, AJ, or is that something that you don't pay attention to since it is your birthday? I wonder. Okay, no other February people. Seems like we're all saving it for March. Okay, well, this is March. Any March birthdays? I'm a March birthday, so that's something I'll let you know, but let's go a little further here. Any March people? If you have a March birthday, go ahead, list it there in the chat. Violetta, okay. Happy birthday just the other day. I'm 3/17, so St. Patrick's Day for me coming right up. Caleb, 3/28. Roheen, there you go. Okay, look, so we've already done it. Violetta and Roheen, 2 people here have both got a March 1st birthday. Now, here's the thing. People always find it highly unusual and unlikely to have a person with a common birthday because of 365 days of the year, and usually people think that's pretty unique about me, the day that I was born. But you'd be surprised to know that when you have a class size of about 30, the odds that there's going to be at least one person in this room with the same birthday as you gets up there to above 50% if you just do the math. And that's another case where our personal assessment of the odds is a little bit out of step with the actual reality of the probabilistic odds. When you have a group of sufficient size, the odds of a common birthday are actually much more common than you think. And the textbook provides this sort of mathematical formula for calculating it. But it's always interesting to go through this example and find that there are a couple of people usually that do have the same birthday in the same class. So anyway, happy birthday to you guys. Happy birthday to me in a couple of weeks. I guess my birthday's not on one of our class days, but it's a Wednesday the 17th. So yeah, guys, that's it for today. We're going to just meet up again on Tuesday. I'll send you the study guide this weekend. In case anyone's looking for the score on the first 2 things, please let me know through email, and I'll be happy to get back to you over the weekend when I can. Other than that, just have a good one, and I guess I'll see you back. Look for the study guide. Pay attention to my titanium announcement that has it there, and then I guess we'll be together on Tuesday to get in the review session before the midterm. All right, everybody. So thanks a lot. Let me know that we're good in the chat. Okay, thanks, Alec. Take care, everybody, and cool. I'll see you then next week. All right, bye-bye.